Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tigard-Tualatin School District Budget Committee meeting. We've had some technical issues at the beginning of the meeting, so we're all logging on at this point, but I think we still need one more committee member to join us. So we're just going to pause here for another minute and see if Octavio is able to join us, and then we'll be good to go. And Sharon, I thought I saw you and now I don't. Is Sharon here? She's not.
No, she emailed me as well, though, and I resent her the link as well.
Okay.
She was here momentarily. She disappeared.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But she's gone now, so. David, did you text Sharon to check in on her?
And David, am I projecting for you tonight, or Amber or Sarah? Oh, you're muted.
If you wouldn't mind, Patty, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, do you want me to get going on that now? Bring that up?
Sure.
Well,
Or do
Actually,
you want me to wait?
no, because that's later in the agenda.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Patty, I'd rather have full screen for the welcome and then the chair confirmation or vote, but I'm not quite sure.
No problem.
But thanks for being ready to go. Appreciate that.
Trying.
So Lisa, so do you see Octavio or Sharon like in a waiting room or anything? So they're just gone.
It's a meeting, so there's no waiting room. They just need to click the link and they should be in the meeting. Yeah, I'm not sure. Does maybe we could call Octavio?
I'll try to call Sharon.
We do have a quorum of the budget committee present. We could start.
Okay, Octavio's on his way. He rebooted his system. Again, not sure what the technical issues are, but to Director Zerksmead's point, we can go ahead and convene or officially begin our meeting. And I, again, want to welcome everyone to the Budget Committee session for TTSD. And Director Moore or Superintendent Ricky Smith, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, the first agenda item, of course, is to elect our officers, and that is a chair, which will facilitate the meeting, and then, of course, a vice chair to assist if needed. So I will call for nominations.
I nominate Corey Morgan to be our presiding officer tonight.
I accept.
Thank you, Corey. Any additional nominations? Okay, with that, I will do a quick roll call, which is the entire committee. And so when I call your name, if you approve of Corey as chair, signify by saying aye. Corey Morgan.
Aye.
Jimmy Brown.
Aye.
Kristen Miles.
Aye.
Megan Madlin.
Aye.
Octavio, I do not believe is here yet. So we'll hold that. Ben Bowman.
Aye.
Jill Zerchme.
Aye.
Karen Emerson.
Aye.
And I don't believe Sharon is here yet either. Okay. And Maureen Wolf is an aye. Motion carries. And with that, Corey, I will hand it to you.
Thank you, Director Wolf. All right, so next up, I will accept nominations for Vice Presiding Officer.
And I'd like to nominate Jimmy Brown as our Vice Presiding Officer.
Jimmy, do you accept?
I accept.
All right, I will go down the list for a roll call vote. Director Bowman.
Aye.
Director Emerson.
Aye.
Director Fox, is she with us yet? No. Director Wolf.
Aye.
Director Gersmead.
Aye.
Committee member Jimmy Brown, do you accept?
Aye.
Yep. Member Octavio is not with us. Member Megan Madlam.
Aye.
Member Kristen Miles.
Aye.
And I, Corey Morgan, vote aye as well. Welcome, Jimmy, as the presiding officer. So next on the agenda, I believe Director Moore is going to present the budget message.
Thank you, Corey. So yes, Patty, now is your time to present the presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Patty. You can go to the next slide, please. It's my pleasure this evening to present our budget message for the 21-22 proposed budget. And it seems like we've had a consistent theme the last couple of years with a lot of uncertainty due to the pandemic. So the budget message addresses that, and I'm going to touch upon that a little bit tonight. And also, we're going to talk about state funding, but we're also going to give some background information based on the most recent economic and revenue forecast update. I didn't have details about that in the budget message, but I think it's good background information and context for all of you as you're listening to some of our budget assumptions and what we're proposing in the budget for 21-22. In addition to our regular state funding and in the state school fund, in addition to the SIA funds, we have a significant number of one-time resources from the federal government and also actually from our state government for this summer. So we'll give an overview of those resources. We'll also share some highlights around the budget investments. We just completed about a month ago our community work group process, and what came out of that were some very strategic investments that were recommended, and we're bringing those forward to the budget committee. In addition to providing some more detail about uses, proposed uses of the ESSER dollars over the in the upcoming year and going forward. And then we also always give an update with reserves, and then touch upon our revenue shortfall with the proposed levels of state school funding that are being proposed, and then also something a little new, looking out at least 2 years with a forecast and budget outlook update that hopefully will shed a little more light on you on the district's financial position. So next slide, Patty. I'm going to pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions of what we're going to talk about tonight, and then move forward. Everybody's good to go, it sounds like. So I mentioned that high level of uncertainty in building a budget during the pandemic. We experienced this uncertainty a year ago. If you remember, we budgeted at the co-chair's level of $9 billion, with the caution that we may have to make adjustments once the legislature made a final decision on the funding level. And everything came out rosy because the legislature maintained the budget level of 9.0. And similarly this year, in some ways, but not others, the governor initially proposed a small incremental budget to 9.1 billion. That was the same level that was in the co-chair's framework back on March 1st. And most recently, the Senate passed a $9.3 billion level. However, in the minds of the K-12 advocates, they're still pushing to a higher level, perhaps as high as 9.6, maybe somewhere in between, like 9.4. So there's still some uncertainty related to that level of funding. And we'll talk a little bit more later about where the assumption is for state funding in this budget. But just to put it out there right now, this budget is based on the $9.3 billion state school fund. The other thing we've experienced over the last year, between the fall of 2019 and 2020, we lost approximately 750 students, or our enrollment was down that amount. So that impacts our funding potentially too, because enrollment is part of the ADMW, or average daily membership weighted element of the state school fund. So we also learned that when we returned to hybrid learning in the last month, 43% of our students have remained in comprehensive distance learning. So partly due to that, the board, as recommended by the administration, has approved a Department of Education application for a virtual academy next year. We've done some reach out to families, and there's, believe it or not, a lot of interest in that option. And so hopefully that'll help perhaps keep families in the district and bring those that may have gone to a private online charter school to come back to our district next year, and help with enrollment and funding, of course. Next slide, please, Patty.
Director Moore, quick question.
Sure.
If it's okay to interject. Do we have a sense of our drop in enrollment compared to other school districts in Oregon, generally speaking?
We do. Our our number is, that 750 number is about 6% from the prior year's enrollment. And in comparing our district to the other large districts, we're on the high end. I think it's us and Springfield. They're at that 5 to 6% level, where some of the other top 13 districts are anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5. So yeah, we're on the high end, and I don't think we ever really determine why our numbers of reduction would be now down higher than others. We did do some work in the fall trying to identify where most of those kids went to, and we had 200 kids, additional kids compared to the prior year, that are going to online charter schools. We had approximately 100 students additionally that are doing homeschooling. And then there's a smattering of reasons for the rest of those, including we're down 200 kindergartners this year. So Dr. Sue shared this week that based on early registration, it looks like we're on target to get back to our 900 kids in kindergarten. So hopefully that answers your question, Corey. If not, be happy to address follow-up questions.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
So I mentioned I wanted to give an overview of the economic and revenue forecast update, which came out last Wednesday. And I think we showed this graph in our budget message presentation a year ago. And you may have remember us talking about, is our recession recovery a U-shaped, a V-shaped, or a square root shape? What we're looking at right now is those years that you see at the top. Those are the various years of recessions over the last few decades. And our most recent one before our current recession was back in 2007. And you can see how long it took to get back to pre-recession job levels, almost 7 years from the peak prior to the recession. On the other hand, with the latest updates from the state economists, we're looking at more like a square root recovery with the 2020 recession. And that means job levels would get back to pre-pandemic levels by the end of 2022. And this has done the shape of this recovery keeps changing. Probably when we looked at this, even as recent of a couple quarters ago, it was looking more like a U-shaped or maybe a bowed V-shape. But in just as recent as the March forecast, the recovery period for pre-pandemic job levels was the second quarter of 2024. So this is really good news for long-term outlook on the economy. And so I'll pause there to see if there's any questions related to this information. Next slide, please, Patty. Also, I want to point out on that previous slide, if you're interested, and I think Sarah has linked the presentation in the chat, you'll see links to both the Oregon Economic Analysis webpage. It's great information if you want to geek out on that stuff. And there's also specific to the economic forecast link there also. Okay, Patty. Sorry for the false alarm. So also the other pieces that one of the other pieces that the economists look at related to the forecast update is the revenue forecast. And hopefully you're able to see that in the current biennium, revenues are up over 1.1 billion from the prior quarter. 1.2 billion are forecasted for next biennium. And then I think the bottom, I'm not seeing the bottom here, 1.6 billion for 23-25. So all in all, the revenue is strong, even though we're at 6% unemployment still. And part of that is we still have people that are out of work receiving federal aid. And so they're still required, of course, to pay taxes on their unemployment benefits. So this is a good chunk of these revenues are personal income taxes. And in addition, the people that have been staying home during the pandemic, they've been there's a lot of pent-up demand and wanting to get out there and spend money that they've been saving during the pandemic. So very good outlook as far as revenue. To the point that as part of the economic forecast, it was announced that with these current projections, there's an estimate of a $1.4 million or $4 billion personal income tax kicker. And just to remind everyone, the way the kicker law works, if the revenue exceeds 2% of what was projected at the beginning of the biennium, those dollars go back to the taxpayers. There's also a kicker for corporate income tax of approximately 600 million, but that is reserved for, it's left in the general fund for K-12 education. Pause there for a second.
I've got a question, David. Can you talk about the negative 13 on that corporate activity tax, why that goes negative in 23-25?
I think what that is, that's a change from March. It doesn't mean the revenue is going to be negative. They're projecting that I think that's $13 million less than what they projected for 23-25 back in March. Does that make sense, Kristen?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of tricky. Not very good identifiers there. Thanks for the question. It helped hopefully clarify it for more than just you. The other thing to consider in the forecast update, I thought it was interesting. One of the economists mentioned that they were really aggressive on their revenue forecast for 21-23. And it sounded like that was an intentional policy decision to help maybe divert the chances of a kicker for that biennium. But what it did is it also resulted in them expressing caution to the state and the legislators that are in charge of revenue, that it may, and budget, that it may make sense to be cautious about use of any reserves, current reserves, because if they overstated what revenue is expected to be for 21-23, then reserves they may have to use reserves to fill that gap. But I thought it was interesting how they were pretty forthright about, hey, we're being really aggressive. The economy's looking strong, outlook's looking strong. We're gonna forecast a high revenue level for 21-23, and one of the byproducts of that is perhaps there won't be a kicker at the end of the biennium. Next slide, please, Patty. So the other update in the quarterly forecast update that the economists give is related to reserves. So the reserves at the state level are three primary elements: the Ed Stability Fund, Rainy Day Fund, and the General Fund ending fund balance. You'll see pretty healthy reserves current reserves of 4.2 billion, or 18% of the state budget. However, even with that increase, that incremental $1 billion increase for revenues for the 21-23 biennium, they're still showing a trending down of fund ending balance. So you see overall reserves going down to 2.2 billion at the end of 21-23, or at 9.7% of the budget, or cut in half approximately. Next slide, please, Patty. So I mentioned our assumption of this for the state school fund of 9.3 billion. And so for Tigard-Tualatin, based on the state school fund formula, that's a total revenue amount of approximately 135.3 million. And that's based on ADMW of 14,683 and a resulting amount per ADMW of approximately $9,213. We always like to put our state school fund worksheet in the budget document. That's on page 28 if you're interested. However, what was in the budget document was based on 9.1, because for the longest time, the ODE had not done any form of update other than what the co-chairs had proposed back on March 1st with their framework. However, about the time we were printing the budget Monday, it was magic. We got the worksheet for 9.3, and I've sent that with a supplemental email this afternoon. So just have to give a little bit of a shout out to Sarah, our controller, because we had projected the number in the budget to be this $135.3 million number. And the number that was on our worksheet was 135.26 million. So we use Forecast 5. It's a forecast modeling tool. And we use that to do our projections based on other levels of funding that we don't have this information from the ODE at the time. So it was great that I was kind of nervous about moving forward with the 9.3 number when we didn't really have a concrete resulting number to Tigard-Tualatin from the ODE, but I was happy it came out that close. Any questions on the revenue assumption? Next slide, please, Patty.
Hey, David. If I could,
or Jimmy.
sorry, if I could go back just one piece. This is relating to the 750 students that we have lost in the last couple of years or whatever. If those students return, will we be able to then receive additional resources based on those kids coming back, or do we just assume that the budget stays the same even if they come back in?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jimmy, and I should have addressed that earlier. So our the extended ADMW amount of 14,683, that's based on our demographer's forecasted number. He forecasted a high, medium, and low number for students, and that number is based on the medium number. And I think it's 12,356 students, where it's actually an increase from the last time when we had a complete school year back in the fall of 2019. Our number was 12,294. So it could turn out the other way around, where maybe we're being aggressive on our enrollment number. And on the other hand, though, on the expenditure side, on the staffing side, we've based our staffing targets and class sizes on the low number, which is, I think, about 100 kids less than that 12,256 or 356, excuse me. Does that help, Jimmy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, Patty, thank you. So I mentioned that the budget message also addresses other state funds. So our student investment account is budgeted at a $8.1 million level, and I'm not sure why I put full allocation there, but because if you remember a year ago, we budgeted 10.1 million. That's what we thought we were going to get before the pandemic hit and the economy took a downturn. But the detailed budget, if you're interested, for the SIA account is on pages 88 through 90, both the revenues and the requirements. So instead of budgeting the 81, I think it was 79.25 FTE that we budgeted a year ago for this current year, we've reduced that to 69.25. And if you remember a year ago, and even at the beginning of our community budget process, we reviewed what we did a year ago with identifying 4 priority levels. And our message back then was, and it's still the same, is that we were likely going to be able to get through the first 3 priority levels with the 8.1 million. And so that's what this budget is built around, those first 3 priority levels. However, things continue to shift with new information, and with these additional resources, which we'll talk about the ESSER federal funds in a moment, it provides some flexibility around using ESSER funds in place of some of the SIA investments, and vice versa, perhaps. The one thing that I shared, the one update I gave to Cabinet this week is we're not on target to spend every dollar of the SIA dollars before the end of June, but we've already submitted to ODE that we want to carry those over through September 30th. So it's possible that we could use SIA dollars perhaps to help with some of our summer programming work that right now we have the placeholder in the budget to use ESSER for that. So there's going to be this continual monitoring and shifting as we learn new information. The other piece of new information is that going back to the revenue forecast, you may not have noticed, but Kristen pointed out the reduction in the 23-25 biennium, but in 21-23, the projections are up 76 million. So the governor came out with a statement this week that she believes SIA should be fully funded. So we may get more than the 8.1 million before it's said and done. But the other uncertainty with that is it's going to be based on ADM numbers as of May, which I'm kind of nervous because our ADM numbers are down this year, and we're getting the benefit in the state school fund of being under the extended ADM model. So our state school fund revenue is based on last year's ADMW. So there's just, I can't say enough of all the fluidity, and we'll try to keep you updated along the way as things change and shift. The other significant state resource, of course, is the high school success funds. That's a allocation of 3.3 annually, but we're expecting approximately 500,000 in carryover. Again, we can spend that through the summer. And so that's a total budget of 3.8 million. So I'm going to stop for a second to see if there's any questions about these state resources.
I've got what's probably a pretty dumb question. I'm just assuming that there's all this carryover because we were in CDL for so long. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's a good part of it. And then we didn't, like for some of our SIA positions, we may not have gotten all those hired out of the gate, or we may not have even hired all the ones we said we were going to hire because we were in CDL and there may not have been the need. So yeah, that's a great question, not a dumb question at all. And that's a common theme throughout our budget. Our general fund, the savings are even more significant, of course. Next slide, please, Patty. So we also have a significant amount of one-time federal resources. So at the end of 2020, through the CRISA Act, the ESSER II dollars were awarded to K-12, and our portion of that is $5.7 million, and we have those dollars available through September 30th of 2023. And then with the American Rescue Plan, we received the ESSER III dollars of just under $13 million. And those dollars, I think I have a typo there, those dollars are actually available through September 30th of 2024. And here in a minute, we'll show a timeline on how we're proposing to use those dollars over the next few years. So the combined budget in the 21-22 budget document is $6 million between the ESSER II and ESSER III. That's the portion that we're planning to implement in 21-22. And we'll share more detail about what some of those positions and programs are when we look at the proposed investments. Next slide, please, Patty. We're also receiving those one-time state resources, the summer learning and childcare grants. The state has allocated $250 million for this purpose, which we are grateful for. We're just trying to figure out how we're going to spend the amount of money over the next summer, when it's a total of $4.3 million. And then we're asked to, on top of that, match 25% of that amount. So over $5 million. Our advocacy is to be able to carry those forward, because the message now is any dollars that don't get spent go back into the general fund at the state level. So these dollars are available currently through September of this year. And you'll see the various uses. K-8 is enrichment focused, 1.8 million. 912 is more around academic recovery, 1.5 million. And then childcare for those families that are participating in the summer program of 900,000. And again, this requires a 25% match by the district. A potential use of those SIA dollars, like I was saying, could be to use for that our portion of the 25% match. I'm referring to the carryover. I don't know if I stated it that way. Next slide, please, Patty. So here's that timeline that we developed with Dr. Sue. This hasn't been necessarily updated where we landed with the specifics of the ESSER budget, but the timeline is the same. We start out with this summer utilizing those state funds. And we actually put a placeholder for perhaps there could be another allocation in the summer of 2022, because our work won't be done with students that need help with recovery and transition back into full in-person instruction through one summer. It's going to be ongoing. So that's why you see at the top there, summer 21 and 22, both a similar allocation with those state dollars. And then next year, the plan would be to stay on a regular school year calendar, 190 days or 36 weeks. And there's some larger categories there to identify how we might use those ESSER dollars beginning in that year. Food service will continue to need support from outside the food service fund, because likely we still won't be serving the same number of meals. That's a full operation, and would be in an attempt to keep it sustainable. We have just a placeholder there for temporary staff, comprehensive distance learning, and professional development. But then going forward, beginning in 22-23, we have a placeholder there for an extended school year calendar, 5 additional instructional days. And we would use, the proposal would be to use approximately $3 million of the ESSER $3 to meet those needs. And one thing we're finding out more and more information from the Department of Ed around the ESSER dollars, and there's a component to use 20% of the dollars for remediation. And I confirmed with one of the finance leaders in ODE today that our extended school year calendar would count towards that remediation in 20%. So that was good news to hear. So we're planning accordingly. And then we would have enough money to do that same calendar in fiscal year 23-24, or school year 23-24. And then hopefully to do some level of summer programming in both summer of 23 and 24, maybe not to the level that we hope to do in 21 and 22, but using perhaps remaining ESSER dollars or a to be determined resource for that. Any questions on this timeline? Again, the intent really is the timeline, not necessarily the dollars of this image, to show you how those ESSER dollars and the summer state dollars might be drawn down. Next slide, please, Patty. So this is a slide I left in from last year's presentation, because we always say that our priorities as a district ground us when it comes to allocation of resources. And just to remind everyone where those priorities are documented, we have our 5-year strategic plan, which we're at the tail end of, that the board developed 5 years ago, and we'll be moving into a new phase of developing a new 5-year plan. We also have, in response to the strategic plan, we have our strategic financial plan, which also is a 5-year plan. And this time next year, we'll be implementing a new plan for the next 5 years. But common theme in both of those plans is a commitment to equity in all students. And specific to the financial plan, our goal is aligning our use of resources with our district goals and priorities. And then a year ago, we implemented our district priorities framework, which has a focus on social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching and leadership, and human capital. So this is just a reminder for everyone. This is helping guide our budget decisions and our allocation of resource decisions. Next slide, please, Patty. So I'm going to ask you, if you have your budget document handy, to turn to page 22. I'm going to take a run through the proposed investments in these three funds: general fund, SIA, and ESSER dollars, and may not touch on every single one of them, but want to at least give an overview. And I'll start with the general fund. So we had, to remind everyone, we had proposals that were made during the work group process. Our early learning team made a proposal of almost $800,000 for several enhancements or expansions to the early learning program, including operationalizing the opening of the new early learning center sometime next school year over at the Old Templeton Core building. And this consists of everything from licensed teachers in the early learning program to IAs to curriculum and materials for the program. In addition to transportation, we have committed to a little bit of a shift since the work group process. We thought we were going to be able to get a bus ordered and here this year to come out of this year's budget, but it looks like it's not going to arrive until July or August for our preschool program or early learning program. And then the plan was to put a second bus in the budget next year, but we'll actually have two buses we'll be purchasing out of next year's budget. And we also have investment to transition the preschool programs that are currently at Tigard and Tualatin into formal early learning programs. And so that requires additional licensed teachers. So in a nutshell, that's what that 800,000 consists of. And then of course we had the presentation from the student union group on extracurricular. And so the general fund would include, we've removed the revenue item for $255,000 for pay to play. So what the budget would account for is basically removal of those fees and that burden on students. In addition to the general fund includes, remember, we had the home to school transportation fund for those students that need to get to and from their activities from home. And the good news is that's 100,000, but through the state school funds, since it's home to school, we'd get 70% reimbursement. So the net cost is 30,000. Going down the column for general fund, we also have some operational items here for the IT department and the transportation department. And then under class size and staffing, we have 9 FTE for our reserve staffing. We always like to have some reserve staffing in place in the event that we get unexpected enrollments and enrollment bumps once we get closer to the start of the school year. This is actually an exchange of FTE in that we had temporary FTE that we didn't roll forward from this year's budget to next year's budget, and setting those temporary positions aside and replacing them with these reserves with the to be determined how they might be used. So a total of investment of a 2.2 million, including those that shift of 990,000 for the reserve staffing. So closer to a $1 million investment in new investments in the general fund. Any questions on the general fund before I move on to the SIA?
Dr. Moore, I just have a quick question about, I was just wondering, this is more of a wondering, for early learning, why did we choose to take it out of general fund instead of SIA dollars? Since I know that that was one of the categories that was in SSA that they said, and it's to dedicate funds to early learning. So I was just wondering what the reasoning was for the bucket of money we're using.
Yeah, Director Fox, a great question. I'm trying to think back to a year ago when we were going through the SSA process, and I somewhat recall this investments for early learning being on the list, but I know there was also some uncertainty of how some of the other buckets of the SSA. I think there was, preschool promise money, how that was going to perhaps trickle down separate from the SIA. So we didn't prioritize it at the time. And I think Dr. McCall's on here too. And if I don't answer this appropriately, but for this year, our early learning program is going to be, we're going to become we're more and more becoming a pre-K-12 district. So we're transitioning from a K-12 district to pre-K-12 district. So, personally, I think we need to prioritize early learning in the general fund and continue to do that.
David, if I might here for just a moment as well, Director Fox, we're also trying to begin the conversation and drive the agenda with the state that they also need to extend the funding rather than K-12 to pre-K-12. And so by putting it into the general fund, it sets that expectation.
Thank you, Dr. Sue.
So for all of these new investments, do we have a plan for how we intended to measure so that we know that they're successful, and how many years are we going to let them run before we determine that it either is or isn't successful and is going to be a continued program? I'm looking specifically at the pay to play and the principles.
Yeah, so I think we had this conversation at a state level meeting today from the same individual that I mentioned from the ODE finance office, and he said something that it's kind of hit home with me. We were talking about ESSER and how what the accountability measures were going to be for ESSER, and he basically said, well, we've kind of laid the groundwork with SIA around accountability measures. And so I think it's going to be a theme throughout our resources that we're going to, and as part of our Smarter School Spending program too. We're going to implement a program, we're going to monitor it, and then we're going to evaluate it over multiple years. And then we decide, are we going to expand the program, sunset it, change it, reduce it? It's no different, Director Zershmin, I think, than that concept.
Thank you.
The one caution, though, I know Dr. Sue, you want to jump in here, but the only other thing I want to add I don't see us with that. You tell me different. I don't see us going back and putting play to play back in. I mean, when we take it out of the budget, we take it out of the budget. We're not gonna, I don't see us going back unless we're in a dire situation with our budget and we need $250,000, an additional $250,000 revenue.
And Director Zershmin, as you know, that we have an AROI process. We also do a program inventory process. I appreciate the question for those who in our community who may be watching this evening. And to your question, how long do you let it run? We're measuring it on a yearly basis. Typically, the average for any new implementation is 3 years, because it takes a year for people to understand it. It takes another year to really get it to a state where it is well understood and being well implemented. And by year 3, you either see the fruits of your labor or you don't. And at that point, you make that decision. But it's an excellent question.
And I just would like to chime in for a second. I think pay to play is going to be interesting and unique to follow, because that's going to also, I think, need to be that ripple effect. I mean, to your point, Dr. Ricky Smith, of those 3 years that students see that as an opportunity, does that come back from middle school, and how do we make those connections? So I do see that as an extended long-term investment, but one that I hope is really well worth it in the end to engage more students.
Correct, Director Wolf. And I think it is also then, it also is indicative of, and do we need to push the concept further down into middle to, re-engage and implement a more robust middle school sports opportunities. And we have, beginnings of good after, extracurricular activities after school, but sports has languished. And so the reliance has been, since the Great Recession, has been on community club sports. Well, not everyone can participate. And so our conversations now with both the city of Tigard and the city of Tualatin relative to how best to utilize our fields is also having an equity conversation, which is for you, as we're thinking about use of our fields, there needs to be an expectation that all students can have access if you're using our fields. And in an attempt to also leverage the power of eliminating pay-to-play fees.
Really appreciate this conversation. And the addition that I would say, which I think is aligned with what Dr. Sue and Maureen was saying, is, to see progress, sometimes it's not just one factor or variable. So even if we don't see movement here with the pay to play elimination, if we go back on that and then try something else, that condition might not be enough by itself to substantially move the numbers. We might have to make multiple things happen at the same time. But I did want to, again, kind of shout out the students for bringing the hard data to the conversation that does show that hopefully this will make a difference, and wanted to thank David and his team for incorporating this into the budget. I think this is a big milestone moment for this to be included. I mean, there were conversations, Jill and Maureen can remind us about, a decade ago, when there were conversations about trying to get this back in the budget. So I'm just really grateful and excited, and we'll have to do the analysis and the conversations, in the evaluation phase. But for now, this is a very cool moment for our district.
I absolutely agree. This is something that we've been trying to chip away at for years, and to finally get through it is really exciting. I'm mindful of the fact that the ESSER dollars, I'm pretty sure, come with, we have to prove that it's working, right? We have to show some outcomes that's proving it's working. And the SIA has some aspects of that too. We have to show what we're doing.
Yeah, the federal dollars did not come with that expectation, but that's part of our practice.
Okay, good.
And so, but absolutely, the SSA, SIA, for those on this in this work group, and I'm looking at Jimmy Brown here, who were part of that process. There are markers that we have set with the state, and they are anchored in the larger goals, which is around graduation rates, attendance, academic outcomes, and so that's data that we will continue to monitor at a much higher state level, but we have internal measures as well. But regardless of funding, Director Search means you are spot on. We measure the impact because whether they're federal or whether they're state or whether they're local dollars, we take fiscal stewardship very seriously.
If I can add to this, again, I want to applaud you for really taking this look at this pay-to-play issue. This is something that I have seen throughout my own public career in working with high school and middle school students. This is an issue that has been going on for a number of years. So to see our district move to make some changes, it fills me with a lot of pride to see that Tigard has jumped into this and said, we can do different and we can do better. I would also say that as we look to do measurements, that we focus not only on quantitative measurements, but we really do a robust qualitative measurement, that we consistently ask students, do they see this being an enhancement to their academic or educational experience, and then springboard that into getting feedback from parents, guardians, other community members to see if they are also seeing an enhancement in the lives of their students, and as well, the ability to utilize the facilities in the community that they're paying for through their local taxes.
Great conversation. Thanks for the question, Director Zerschmied. So speaking of SIA, or Student Investment Account, we have small amount of reallocation of dollars compared to the original plan. We have the $100,000 for the Club and Fine Arts Fund for extracurricular, also proposed by the students, of course. And we've shifted from the FTE for the mental health social worker to a little bit different job description, mental health and wellness coordinator. And I cannot do justice on what that is. And I don't know if Carol is here this evening, but perhaps if there are specific questions, we can get information related to that, or maybe somebody else can talk about that position. And then we also we had the elementary assistant principals and deans in priority 4, and we've shifted 3 FTE up so they could get paid under the allocation of $8.1 million. And so those are our proposed investments or changes to the way we're using SIA for next year. So I'll pause there for a second and see if we have any questions. And then for the next column over, the ESSER $2 and $3, one thing I'll say about accountability related to ESSER, the ODE is working on an assurance document that we'll need to be able to certify and sign off on, that pertaining to, I mentioned one piece of that is we have to spend 20% of the dollars on remediation. And that's through the life of the grant. It doesn't have to be on a year-by-year basis, but it's between now and the end of September of 2024. And like I said, our initial proposal of expanding the school year calendar with those dollars would meet that 20% rule. So stay tuned. That Dr. Sue, that assurance form is in draft form, and we're going to see it shortly. So as far as I mentioned the 3 FTE for the assistant principals in SIA. We're prioritizing the rest of the schools, assistant principals or deans, out of ESSER, at least over the next couple years. So that's an additional 5 FTE. So we already had schools that had 2 deans, so that covers our 10 schools. And Director Ebert can share at some point with all of you which schools are getting a dean and which schools are getting an AP. And then we have the staff diversification plan. Out of the HR department, we have 117,500 reserved for that. And we have some professional development. This is actually a shift from the SIA. We had to free up some dollars in the SIA to get to the 3 AP positions. So we're moving the professional development funds over to the ESSER side of things. We have a placeholder to cover the food service deficit of $1.5 million. Next year, that might be a high number. We're still in flex mode of what our food service model is going to look like next year as far as reimbursement from the the federal government through the state. We have also the placeholder for the 25% match for the summer learning program out of ESSER, 1.1 million. And again, that could shift to perhaps some of those carryover funds that we have in the SIA fund in the current year. We have dollars reserved for the virtual school principal and office support out of the ESSER funds, total of 2 FTE. And then to help our schools who don't necessarily see a nurse every day in their buildings, we're prioritizing what we're referring to as health room attendants. So these are part-time positions. They'd be more hours at the secondary level and lesser hours at the elementary level, but somebody would be there to take care of the health room needs on a daily basis, at least for a few hours. And we have
If I can interrupt for just a second, those
Sure.
positions, those are classified employees, not RNs, is that correct?
correct, classified employees.
Thank you.
We also have, remember how we have community partnerships dollars in the SIA with the REAPs and the ERCOs and Latino Network. We're also focusing on partnerships for the summer program. And so there's an additional $220,000 here for that. I may have that mixed up a little bit. This might be additional for the regular school year because we were planning on using the state dollars for those partnerships. So I misspoke there. I apologize. And then we have our iReady assessment software and professional development, just under $300,000. That's to help with assessment needs as kids re-enter full in-person learning. And we have 150,000 reserved for Pack with Pride, and we have a vision for an expanded partnership there. And then we had, I mentioned, we've moved some PD and collaboration time over to the tune of 111,000 over from the SIA. And down under class size and staffing, we have several positions that would be temporary. A health teacher or counselor to oversee the Aaron's Law work. We have several investments in Avid and Avid TOSA, and then some additional licensed staffing needs to fill some holes at the middle school level. And we have 2 licensed positions for the LIFT program at the high schools. And that is it for the ESSER proposal. Any questions?
Director Moore, I just have a question about the elementary assistant principals and deans. Could you remind me of the difference between the dean and the principal and which schools will be getting which?
Yeah, so the deans are going to be licensed positions. So they could be a licensed teacher who has an interest in becoming an administrator eventually, or working on their administrator's license. And then of course the APs are going to be licensed administrators. And I don't know the schools. I don't know if Debbie is here and wants to jump in.
I can share the
Okay.
schools. So the schools that will receive an AP are Durham Elementary. We already in Bridgeport, Mesker, Deer Creek, and then we have just one more. It'll come to me.
I'm putting it in the chat right now, but APs will go Bridgeport, Metzger, Deer Creek, Durham, and Templeton.
Yes, yep.
And deans will go to the other 5. So CFT, Byram, Alberta Ryder, Mary Woodward,
and Tualatin.
There we go. Thank you. I'll put it in the chat for everybody.
Thank you. So it's just whether they have their administrator's license or not, they're still fulfilling the same role. That's my understanding, right?
It's not, no, it's not the same role.
Not the same?
No, assistant principals will have evaluation responsibilities as well, and be more geared toward instructional pieces.
Okay.
And the dean positions will be more structured in positive behavior supports. Some instructional for sure, but they won't have the evaluation piece that goes with the role of the assistant principal.
Okay, thank you. That's very, very helpful to understand. And then my follow-up question to that is, so these seem more like permanent positions, but we're using ESSER dollars. And I know we've been reluctant to do that because, you know, for more permanent things, we want to try to use general funds. So are we just hoping that we get the money in the future to, because I don't think these are temporary positions, right? So, and that would be the same with the health attendants. Are those considered permanent or temporary? What are your thoughts?
I think I'll answer the last one first. I think Carol's seen the health room attendant need being temporary as we come out of COVID, making our way back into the buildings. You know, probably 2 years at the most for those. On the other hand, yeah, Sharon, you're preaching to the choir on this. Is the next part of the conversation I'm going to share is I'm going to share kind of a timeline of our and use of our all of our state funding sources. And you know, you'll get me on a soapbox soon, so I'm going to stop.
David, didn't we decide because SIA wasn't fully funded and our deans and AP positions were in the SIA funding for the stage 4?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, we could end up
borrowing.
This is that shift I'm talking about. I was talking about earlier. We could end up charging them to SIA because we might get our 10 million or even more next year.
So we're basically committing to hiring, and we're just trying to figure out which bucket, which the best bucket. Okay, thank you.
We're basically borrowing.
Following up on that,
yeah.
Are we planning then on having a dean or an AP at Art Rutkin when it's opening? And in that case, do we need to set aside additional money for administrative costs for that school?
Director Jersmead, it would depend on the what the enrollment would start at for that school. For us to, because I've created a staffing a ratio for deciding how a dean is applied to a school or an AP is applied to a school. And I don't know at the first couple of years if we would have enough students in programming and, you know, all those pieces that would qualify for a dean or an AP. But we would certainly most likely grow into that.
So if I can jump in, Dr. Moore, on your comment in terms of, and I recognize that health room assistants are not the same as nurses, but I think the board, you know, received advocacy from our nurses. And I'm not sure if Director Kinch is on the call. We talked about her possibly chatting about that as a follow-up in their advocacy for additional support. And if Carol's not on, just not sure if someone can address that, but just that concern of having appropriate staffing for the size of district we are.
Yeah, this is Director Bernard here. I can probably speak to the nurses. So I think in the conversations with the assistants for the health rooms is our nurses share multiple schools and they're not always available. And so the situation that we've been experiencing this last year has put a lot of stress and an extra load on those health rooms, and they've already been loaded up. And what typically happens is the secretaries are pulled away from their duties whenever a student comes, and it can be really those elementary health rooms are super busy, and we expect them to continue to be busy, you know, at the beginning of next year as well. And so I think there's been a request for a long time for some extra support, and so their focus would be on the health rooms, and they also could help support the main office or the office if there aren't students in there.
Do we get any of that nursing support? Is that something that ESD provides at all?
Yeah,
No, we've hired, we have had a nurse through the SD before. We used our credits for it, but they're a real challenge it's a real challenge to find nurses that will apply for the school setting.
Did that answer your question, Maureen?
Well, Darren, thank you. Well, Darren and David, thank you. So Darren, I feel like you addressed kind of the pinch points that we're having in the health rooms, but I'm not sure. I don't think that specifically addressed the nurses. And so, I'll pursue that with Carol, or maybe when the board has the official budget meeting in June, just to circle back on that, because I think that was to all the board members. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm sorry, I should have double checked with Director Kinch before this evening in terms of addressing that.
Yeah, Director Wolf, what I would share with you, having experience relative to how you provide healthcare. I think that certainly the advocacy for the nurses is a broader piece relative to diabetic management and caseloads, and that is something that Director Kinch can sit down with you and have very specific conversation about how that gets managed. The use of these health assistants, however, is to not pull you. It is about differentiation of roles. So to ensure that the low level types of daily work that needs to be done in terms of working with students, that it provides an additional layer of support to nursing staff so that they are truly directed when they are needed, when that level of RN, BSN expertise is required, versus the low level type of activities that fill those rooms that many times pull off school secretaries and others. And so it's a matter of building a system of differentiated support while we continue to take a look at the needs of, clearly if 6 nurses aren't enough, do we need 2 more, and how might we facilitate that? And that Director Kinch has taken a look at, has laid out some thinking around, and she would be more than happy to sit with you and explain that.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Ricky Smith.
Before we close out the investment conversation, a couple more points I wanted to make. I footnoted down below that the class size and staffing numbers, they don't account for the current Senate Bill 580 that's being considered at the legislative level related to bargaining class size. So just wanted to put that out there. And then also, for lack of a better place to talk about this, is Director Wolf reminded me about it this afternoon, and I didn't point it out in the budget message, and I thought about it afterwards, and Director Wolf and I were on the same page. We're experiencing, beginning July 1, reduced PERS rates, and so when we built our current service level budget, we're reflecting savings of $2 million in our general fund with those reduced rates. And part of the challenge, Director Wolf also asked me to address at the state level going forward, how things might look related to PERS. There's a couple things. They're forecasting the rates to go back up at the beginning of the 23-25 biennium. So just to remind everyone, the PERS fund is funded by 2 sources primarily: what local governments and state governments put into the PERS fund on behalf of their employees, and in addition to their investment earnings. So that's why the rates ebb and flow, because there's good years of investments and there's bad years. So this year's rates are based on 2019 and the actuarial evaluation that was completed as of the end of 2019, and that happened to be a decent year for investment earnings. That's just one part of it. There's the cost elements too of the system. So for whatever reason related to cost, investment performance, which would be the 21-21 years investment performance, and the actuarial evaluation that's completed at the end of 2021, that'll be the driver for what our rates are beginning in 23. The early forecast is rates are going back up. So the other double whammy we're going to hear about at the PERS board meeting next week is that there's an assumed earnings rate, and as the actuaries do their work, they're currently using an assumed annual earnings rate of 7.2%. They're going to be proposing to the board, the PERS board, to reduce that to 6.8. What that's going to do is it's going to jack our rates up in the short term even more. So long term, it may be good policy, but one of my colleagues at the state level pointed out today that the 10-year average for the PERS fund earnings is 7.26% or something. So it's spot on where we're currently at, but I think they're looking longer term. So there's that update. The other update is, and this is part of my soapbox, you guys have to listen to it because it's my part of the agenda. The other piece that really messed up the current service level calculations based on how districts determined it and how the legislative fiscal office determined it, the LFO estimated we'd see 6% savings in our PERS rates beginning with July. Our number is closer to 3 on average across K-12, at least the large districts. And the reason why is most of the districts statewide have done a refunding of their unfunded liability at some point during the past several decades. And regardless of what they do with our PERS rates at PERS, we have to continue paying that debt at the same rate. So we're not receiving the benefit of the decrease in rates, but the analysts that project the current service level at the legislative fiscal office, they're not taking that into account. So that's one of the reasons why you see a difference in where people think we're at with current service level. Is that what you wanted update on? Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's perfect.
Okay. Everybody's happy with investments discussion, at least? Let's move on to the next slide, please, Patty. I think we're headed towards the end. Quick review of reserves. So our board policy, DBDB, which is our fund balance policy, it uses as a base our current operating revenue, and in this budget, it's 154.2 million. So the board aims for a sustainability reserve of 5% of that number. So in the budget, you'll see that 5% is just over, I think, 7.7 million. Similar or same for the unappropriated ending fund balance. 5% of 154.2 is that 7.7 number. And the difference is I think in terms of where the board was at in the development of this policy, the sustainability reserve we've also referred to as that rainy day. So if we're in a situation where we're in a recession like we are currently, although it's not as extensive as the 2007-8 recession, those dollars are designed to cover reduction in revenues during that time frame. And then this year, typically we budget any excess over our 12% total target into a line item. Normally you would see the operating contingency would say 2%. That's the board policy level. I have all the excess above the 12% in operating contingency because in the event that some unknown need comes up, like if we get broadsided with that Senate Bill 580 and we have to invest in additional teaching staff or whatever it is, the board has access to this contingency. If it's under one of the unappropriated levels, either that or the sustainability, we can't access those dollars without going back probably to the budget committee. So it provides flexibility for the board to access those dollars during the year if we want to move them to a line item. Right now, it's sitting in reserve or contingency. We also have in our reserve, it was mentioned earlier about our reserve for the art rec and opening. We've added $300,000 to what we had set aside a year ago of 1.5. So we have 1.8 million sitting there at the end of this year. And then a year later, we'll be opening that building. Those dollars will be available to pay for additional staff and operationalizing that building. So total reserves in the budget as budget of 22.15 million. I'm going to have you turn to page 40 real quick in your budget document. So I wanted to go over the general fund column in this presentation on that page. So you can see kind of the flow of the dollars in form of revenues and expenditures. So our total revenues are that 154.2 million. So that's the base for determining what we have to have in reserves with the applicable percentage for each category. Our total expenditures are 163 million. So we have a operating deficit of 8.85 million. We're projected to start the year with a beginning fund balance in this budget of 31 million. So at the end of 21-22, if everything went as planned, which it won't, but it's just a plan now, a budget. But if it did, we'd end up with just over 22 million. And then down below, I have the breakdown in the different categories, 4.9 for operating contingency, the 7.7 for the unappropriated and rainy day, and then 1.8 for the art rec and reserve. Is that clear for everyone? Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. I think we're almost there. So this is that same picture in chart form, although I've added some forecasted numbers for 22-23. So if we start 21-22 with our preliminary ending fund balance in 2021 of 31 million, that's our green line there. And we're spending more than we're bringing in new dollars. The first year, we're going to spend down that fund balance to that 22 million. And then in the second year, we would spend it down another 8 to 9 million to $13 million. So in effect, at least in the first year, we're kind of using our rainy day reserve in this scenario. This isn't ideal. This isn't perfect, but it's our budget, and there's I wish there was more that could be done at the state level, so we didn't have to spend at this level if we end up with this level of state school funding. But it's where we're at, where we are today. Next slide, please.
David,
hey, David. Jimmy?
In the last slide there, I think that's like a drawdown slide, basically, right?
Yep.
Okay. So prior, in a prior year or prior point in time, we drew down our dollars significantly, but then through your processes and the board's processes, we were able to generate the reserve fund up again. Mm-hmm. Do you see that occurring after 23-25? That same type of increase in the reserve fund based on how based on the decisions and policies that board and the fund developers are putting together?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jimmy. I think we showed that by, if I remember right, it was the fourth quarter of 2022, jobs would be back to pre-pandemic levels. So that's a good sign. So hopefully, that trickles down to state revenues and funding for K-12 education or pre-K-12 education. So, if I had to say today, I think we're going to have our ebbs and flows like any era. And I would say, yes, if we do end up drawing down at this level, we're gonna bounce back at some point based on change of circumstances more globally.
Thank you.
David, Ben also had a question.
Yeah, I saw that one. So if you can go back, Patty, one slide. Ben asked about if we got to a $9.6 million level or $1 billion level, excuse me, if that green line would flatten out. Not quite. For Tigard-Tualatin, for every 100 million, it means $1 million for us each year. So if we went from 9.3 to 9.6, we would have an additional $3 million approximately in revenue. So instead of a $8.5 million shortfall, it'd be over 5 million. And that's kind of what we've been saying from the start. We need 10 million to have our current operating revenues be the same as our current operating expenditures on a current service level basis. And plus we added, we're proposing to add those investments initially our shortfall at the 9.3 number was closer to 7, but with those additional investments, we've created an additional gap, perhaps, if that's where the budget committee goes with this budget. So let's move on to looking at a little history of state resources. Next slide, please, Patty. So recently, Dr. Sue was asked to respond to one of our local senators about various elements about our budget and everything from, what's the impact of these different funding levels, what's our projected FTE, what's our amount of ESSER dollars, SIA dollars, et cetera. But they also, as a additional piece of information in the request, they showed at the state level how a bar graph like this that showed between 2017-19 biennium and the 21-23 biennium, how the dollars have grown for K-12 as far as state funding. And they basically had it broken down into the state school fund grant, high school success, even the nickel and dime stuff like Awesome Grant and other grants in aid, SIA, and then the ESSER dollars. So when we sent our response, I put the data in for Tigard-Tualatin in those categories for those 3 biennium, but I added the 4th biennium because I wanted to show that when those ESSER dollars go away in 23-25, we'll have, based on what our plan is now, we're going to have $14 million less in 23-25 of ESSER dollars. I'm making an assumption of $9.5 billion state school fund just for this illustration, but and there was an interesting story today, and Sarah and I were in our 10K state level meeting. I showed this, and Sue can talk about what's going on at the Capitol, but the legislatures have been showing the document. It's going through the Capitol of the first 3 biennium, and so one of the lobbyists was on the call, and she confirmed that they're using the same approach with their pushback on showing the trend down in the next biennium. So, and I think we even use the same assumption approximately for the state school fund number. So I think at K-12, we're all aligned. It sounds like they're all aligned at the legislative level too, so except maybe for some of the Republicans, but hopefully it's still going to be a knockdown drag out and we'll still get additional funding. So next slide. So next steps with the budget committee. So we'll find out if we have any public comment this evening, and then there'll be an opportunity for the committee to deliberate on the budget. Wanted to point out that the end responsibilities of the budget committee are to consider approval of the total budget, which is $401 million, and it includes the general fund of $185 million. Plus, the other responsibility is to approve the various tax rates and then our tax levy for repayment of the debt service. So depending on how our deliberation goes with committee tonight, we have a placeholder for an additional meeting on June 2nd, next Wednesday. Otherwise, we will, if we move forward with approval tonight, the school board will hold the public hearing and take public comment on the approved budget on June 28th. And the budget would be adopted then that same evening, or at least considered for adoption. Any questions on next steps? Okay. Next slide. I think I'm almost ready to close out here. So I just wanted to end by sharing some thanks and gratitude. Would like to thank Dr. Sue for her leadership and with the community and our district and our cabinet in helping shepherd us to a final proposed budget document. It's been a long ride. It seems like we've been working on this forever. And thanks to Sarah for being the facilitator and development of the budget document. There's no harder job than taking big picture thoughts and concepts and putting it into detail in a final budget document. And not only that, we had the hiccup of our technology challenges, and it takes time just to get the budget together when things are running smoothly. But when you have other things out of your control, it complicates things. And thank you for allowing us to extend out another week for the budget meeting. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a headache for all of you. And then also thanks to our cabinet members for sticking with me to the end with development of our ESSER budget. We kind of kept the framework high level through the community work group process. And at the end, I think we came up with a good plan. And then thank you to Amber Summers, our assistant in the business office. She does a great job of compiling the final budget document, and she's here this evening taking notes. So, and thanks to our board and budget committee for sticking through our process along the way and for your engagement and input. So with that, I am done for the evening unless there's final questions.
Okay, no questions. Thank you, Director Moore. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to comment now, but I'm just always in awe of the amount of detail and work that must go into this. So thank you for walking us through that and sharing. Next on the agenda is public comments. And I'm not sure, do we have any public comments?
We do not have any public comments.
Excellent. Okay, so since there are no public comments, we can begin the committee deliberations. So maybe we'll try it this way. Budget committee members wishing to comment if you want to maybe raise your virtual hand so we can get a general sense maybe of how many comments we have, and then start with one and go, I guess. I don't know. Or I guess we could all just try to talk at once. Maybe not. No, yeah, virtual hand. Okay. So does anyone have any comments, discussion, deliberation, clarification?
Virtual hand.
Director Wolf.
Yeah, I'll be fast because it was a very thorough presentation. So David, thank you for that. And Corey, I just appreciate you kind of giving the off status, always outstanding work, really excited through all these, just some thoughtful work of programs, expanding, enhancing, and supporting some programs, and just grateful. So just no questions, just gratitude back to Amber, Sarah, and David, and Sue for her leadership. Looking forward to the budget ahead.
Committee member Jimmy.
Yes, I just want to echo the amount of work to putting this budget together. You know, municipal budgets, school budgets, the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, you know, most people will never get to hear about or see. So I know this was just an incredible amount of work, and I just want to offer my congratulations to you all for pulling this off. I have a question, and I think, David, you may have touched on this, and that it was just an issue around earnings on investments, and I wasn't sure if that section was talking about investments relating to the PERS issue, or if it was something different.
I think that was related to the PERS conversation, Jimmy.
Okay. And so then, and I think it was because in 2018-19, the investment was at 1.4 mil, and by 2021, it'll drop down to 500K. And that's what made me think it must be relating to the PERS piece.
No, that's a separate item, but actually we talked about this recently at some point, I think with our financial oversight committee this week. So our investment rates have been trending down this year. So we had budgeted $1 million for the current year. It's probably going to be closer to $500,000 to $700,000. So we adjusted our budget for next year to $500,000 because we expect those rates to remain down. Great question.
That's a market volatility issue.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Reading through the chat, I see several folks have indicated they don't have any questions. Anyone else before we call for a motion? Okay, I'd like to invite a motion to approve the budget as presented.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the budget as presented.
Jimmy has made a motion. Is there a second?
I will second the motion.
Thank you, Octavio. All right, I will go down the list once again for a roll call vote. Director Bowman.
Aye.
Director Emerson.
Aye.
Director Fox.
Aye.
Director Wolf.
Corey, I'm sorry to stop, but I believe, David, you can help me. I think the actual motion needs to be read out loud. Is that correct or no?
Yeah,
right.
it would make sense because to identify I think the actual amount is in the motion too. Plus we have, and you could do it one of two ways because there's two parts to the motion. we have to ask the committee to approve the budget and then also approve the tax levy rates and levy.
Thank you. That was my bad. Yeah.
We could do it as separate, but it'll save time if you do it all together.
Yeah. So
we can.
And I sent out, if you're wondering what the motion says, I sent that out this afternoon as part of the same email with the state school fund worksheet.
And I just included the link again in the chat in case somebody.
Yeah. So Jimmy, if you would restate your motion, if you'd like to, do you have the script accessible? You got it. Okay. So just restate it and we're good to go.
He also needs to retract his previous motion and second.
Yeah.
I would like to retract my initial motion.
And
is there a second?
I will second that one as well. Retract.
Thank you.
And do we vote on the motion of retraction?
Go ahead and make the motion, Jimmy.
Is this the motion for approving the budget, or is this the motion for the retraction? Okay, if it's for the motion.
You don't need to make a motion to retract. You just need to state that you've retracted it and your second has also retracted their second.
I moved that the Budget Committee of the Tigard-Tualatin School District 23J, Washington and Clackamas Counties, Oregon, hereby approve as proposed the budget for the 2021-22 fiscal year in the sum of $401,039,637 for all funds now on file at the Hibbard Administration Office. I further move that the Budget Committee of the Tigard-Tualatin School District 23J, Washington and Clackamas Counties, Oregon, approve the taxes provided for in the proposed budget at the rate of $4.9892 per 1,000 of assessed value for the operations in the amount of $1 per $1,000 of assessed value for local option tax for general school operations, and in the amount of $23,274,700 for general obligation bonds.
Thank you, Jimmy. Is there a second?
This is Octavio, and I will do the second.
Thank you, Octavio. Apologies for my previous error. Are we ready to vote? I will go down the list for roll call. Director Bowman.
Aye.
Director Emerson.
Aye.
Director Fox.
Aye.
Director Wolf.
Aye.
Director Zerschmied.
Aye.
Committee member Jimmy Brown.
Aye.
Member Octavio Gonzalez.
Aye.
Member Megan Madlam.
Aye.
Member Kristen Miles.
Aye.
And I, Corey Morgan, vote aye. So the motion passes by unanimous vote. Thank you very much. Dr. Sue, would you like to provide any final comments before we close?
Thank you, Chair Morgan. I just, again, my profound gratitude to the Budget Committee and to our board directors for all of your commitment and work, and especially this evening, and for an approval, unanimous approval. That speaks well to the work that Director Moore and Sarah and Amber and the cabinet and all have done. And we appreciate that affirmation. And we also appreciate your keen eye to stewardship in this district, as well as your comments this evening that continue to reaffirm that keeping students at the center of our decision-making is the best way to budget these dollars. And so nothing but profound gratitude for all of you. We look forward to continuing to work with you in the future and sharing with you the good work, the results that are coming from these dollars and the good work that we are doing. Thank you all so very much this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Sue. If there's no further comment, this meeting is adjourned at 8:24 p.m.
Thank you all.